They tried to make him look bad on TV, but his answer changed everything. One afternoon, Darius Bell got an email. It was short and formal, from the people who make the Morning Exchange, one of the most popular talk shows in the country. They wanted him, the CEO of a tech company called Innovis, to come on their show to talk about diversity in business. Darius had seen this before. Big TV shows suddenly remembering black business owners exist, showing them off for a few minutes, then moving on to the next hot topic. But this time was different. His company Innovis wasn't just some small startup. They just won a huge contract worth millions of dollars, beating some of the biggest companies out there. That wasn't luck. That came from 20 years of hard work. He wasn't sure about accepting at first. His assistant Tasha noticed his doubt. "Are you sure about this? You know how these shows work. They love success stories, but they love tearing people down even more." Darius sat back in his chair. "I can handle it. Plus, it's national TV exposure. Let's see what they have to say." Tasha sighed and shook her head. "Just don't let them trick you into saying something wrong." He nodded, though he knew what game they might play. If this interview was a trap, they picked the wrong person to mess with. On interview day, Darius arrived at the TV studio in Los Angeles. The green room was cold and plain. A young producer barely looked up from her clipboard. When she greeted him, "Mr. Bell, thanks for coming. We'll get your microphone ready in 5 minutes." No friendly chat, no warm welcome. Just business. While he sat getting makeup done, the TV monitor showed what was currently on air. First some celebrity gossip, then a cooking show, then came a preview card. Coming up next, the black tech boom. Is it talent or special treatment? Darius clenched his jaw. So that's what they were planning. But if they thought they had him cornered, they were in for a surprise. He didn't know yet just how far they would go to try to make him look bad. The TV set looked friendly, soft blue and gold colors, with a glass table between the host's chair and where guests sit. Cameras watch silently, ready to catch every move. And expression. Darius fixed his suit jacket as he sat across from Madeline Royce, the show's main host. She was known for asking tough questions. She smiled, but her eyes stayed cold. "Darius Bell," she started, her voice smooth and practiced. "CEO of Innovis, a true American success story." Darius nodded politely. "Thanks for having me." She leaned forward slightly, looking at her cards. "Let's get right to it. Your company just got a $200 million government contract, beating some of the biggest tech companies out there. That's impressive." Darius knew this game. Build him up first, make it seem like they respect what he's done. He gave a careful answer. "It was a long process, but yes, we worked hard and made a security system that worked better than our competitors. Simple as that." Madeline crossed her legs. "Some people call it groundbreaking." She paused. "But others have questions." Darius didn't flinch. Questions. She picked up a card and read from it. "Some experts say Innovis got help from government diversity programs. That companies like yours have an advantage in getting these contracts because agencies want to work with more diverse companies. That maybe this wasn't just about being the best, but about filling a quota." There it was. The real reason they invited him. Darius waited a moment before answering. "I've heard that argument before. It's funny though. When a black entrepreneur wins, people call it special treatment. But when old companies run by the same families for generations get these deals, nobody questions it." The mood in the studio changed. The producers looked at each other. Madeline held her ground. "So you're saying race had nothing to do with your success?" Darius laughed softly, shaking his head. "Let me ask you this. When SpaceX got NASA contracts, did anyone ask if Elon Musk met a diversity quota? When Jeff Bezos got government deals for Blue Origin, was it because of his background? Or do we only ask that question when the CEO looks like me?" Madeline's face barely changed. "So you don't think these diversity programs help?" Darius folded his hands. "They help make things more fair. But what people don't realize is things were never fair to begin with." But Madeline wasn't done. She had something else planned. Her smile got sharper, like a hidden knife. She looked at her cards, then back at Darius. "Well, Darius, let's talk about that fairness you mentioned," she said, her voice getting colder. "You grew up in Birmingham, Alabama. Single mother, public school, worked your way up from nothing. That's inspiring." Darius nodded slowly, seeing where this was going. Madeline continued, "But here's what some might wonder. How does someone with no fancy college degree, no family connections, go from a struggling neighborhood to winning contracts that billion-dollar companies can't get?" She let the question hang in the air. The suggestion was clear. "How did you really get here? Did someone pull strings?" Darius tilted his head slightly, thinking carefully about his words. "It's called work, Madeline. Some of us don't have family money or country club connections to rely on, so we build from nothing." Madeline nodded like she was listening, but she wasn't really hearing him. "But surely you had help along the way." She pushed. "Maybe a mentor, a program, something that gave you an extra boost." Darius took a quiet breath. Yeah, help came in the form of working 3 jobs while getting my engineering degree. Help came in the form of sleeping in my office while I built my first software because I couldn't afford rent. That's the help I got. Her lips pressed together for a second. The producers behind the cameras watched closely. Madeline shuffled her cards again. And yet, some would say, Black entrepreneurs today have more opportunities than ever before. That programs like affirmative action, minority business grants, and government help exist specifically to open doors that weren't open before. Darius leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on his knees. You know what's funny? When a Black business owner succeeds, people always ask what programs helped us, but nobody asks which old money bank helped fund a white-owned startup. Nobody asks which family connections got them into Stanford, or which golf buddy invested in their company. He let that sink in before continuing. The truth is, success isn't handed out like lottery tickets. People like me had to be twice as good just to get a chance. The room felt different now. The audience realized they were watching something real happen, but Madeline didn't blink. Instead, she smiled like a chess player who thinks they've trapped their opponent. That's an interesting view, she said, smooth as glass. But let's talk about another factor, perception. She turned slightly toward the cameras. Darius, you present yourself as self-made, but let's talk about how people see your story. Some say Black entrepreneurs get an unfair advantage when it comes to media attention, that the story of overcoming struggle sells better than the thousands of white business owners who work just as hard but don't get the same attention. Darius let out a quiet laugh. Oh, so now we get too much attention. Madeline kept her polished smile, but her posture changed slightly. She wasn't expecting him to laugh. You're telling me that in a world where 90% of big companies' CEOs are white men, where most tech funding still goes to white-owned startups, the real problem is that people like me get too much press? Madeline fixed her hair. I'm just pointing out that nowadays, some people feel there's pressure to highlight diversity over pure talent. Darius shook his head. Talent, right? He glanced at the cameras, then back at her. Let me ask you something, Madeline. Do you really think that if I wasn't excellent at what I do, I'd be sitting in this chair right now? You think I got here because I played the diversity card? Or do you think I got here despite everything designed to keep me out? The silence in the room was louder than any of her questions, but Madeline wasn't done. Not yet. She had one last trick to play, the one designed to break him. Madeline took a slow breath, shifting in her seat to look casual, but Darius saw through it, a crack in her perfect act. She looked at her cards again, then put them down. She wanted to say this part directly. Darius, she said, tilting her head slightly, I think it's fair to say you're passionate about this, and I respect that. But let me ask you something. Darius nodded, waiting. Do you think some of this anger is exaggerated? She paused to let the words sink in. After all, your success story proves that the system isn't as stacked against Black entrepreneurs as some claim. The nerve of it. Darius could feel himself getting angry, but he didn't show it. Instead, he laughed quietly, shaking his head. You know, he said, keeping his voice steady, it's funny how people love to use one success story as proof that a problem doesn't exist. Madeline's smile stayed in place, but something in her eyes changed. Darius leaned forward slightly, resting his arms on his knees. Let me put it this way. If one person climbs out of a burning building, do you point at them and say, see, the fire wasn't that bad? Madeline opened her mouth, hesitated, then closed it. Darius wasn't finished. The fact that I made it doesn't mean the system isn't broken. It just means I fought twice as hard to get through it. He let his words sink in. Even the camera crew had stopped moving. Madeline adjusted in her seat, trying to regain control. I understand your view, but let's talk about another side of this. She turned toward the cameras slightly, her voice carefully neutral, like she was doing damage control. Some might say your frustration isn't really about race, she continued. That it's about being angry at bigger companies. After all, you've publicly criticized big tech companies for not hiring more diverse executives. Darius tilted his head. Angry? Number holding them accountable? Absolutely. Madeline pressed her lips together for a moment. Then what do you say to those who believe that in today's economy, success comes from hard work, not race? Darius breathed out through his nose, then looked straight at her. This was it. The moment. I say, he began, that people love to believe in fairy tales when they're the ones benefiting from them. A wave of silence swept over the set, the kind that sticks. But let's be real, he continued, voice steady. Black entrepreneurs still get denied loans at twice the rate of white business owners. We still get less than 2% of venture capital funding. And even when we prove ourselves, we still get asked whether we deserved our success. Madeline sat still, listening, but not really understanding. So let's stop pretending the system isn't rigged, Darius said, calm but firm. It is, and the only people who don't see it are the ones it works for. Pure, heavy silence followed. The producers didn't cut to commercial. The control room didn't step in. This was raw. Madeline shifted slightly, finally looking uncomfortable. She tried to speak, but Darius wasn't done. This was the moment that would shock the whole country. Madeline cleared her throat, glancing at the producers off camera, but no help was coming. She had started this, and now she had to sit through it. Darius adjusted his watch, letting the silence last just long enough to make people uncomfortable. Then he leaned back in his chair, letting out a breath. "You know what the real problem is," he said, his voice quieter now, but somehow heavier. Madeline hesitated. "What?" Darius didn't blink. "The bar isn't in the same place for everyone." She shifted slightly. "Meaning? I mean," Darius said, "a mediocre white man can fail upward in this country, but a brilliant black man has to jump through flaming hoops just to get a chance." A producer off camera cursed under their breath. They knew this would go viral. Darius kept going. "A white CEO can run a company into the ground, bankrupt it, fire thousands of people, and somehow get hired somewhere else. Meanwhile, a black CEO has one bad quarter, and suddenly it's proof that we weren't ready for leadership." Madeline tried to respond, but he wasn't finished. "And the best part," Darius laughed bitterly, "when we actually make it, people like you sit across from us and ask if we got here because of some special advantage." Silence. Madeline's jaw tightened. It was subtle, but the camera caught it. Darius leaned forward slightly. Not aggressive, just firm, just final. "You wanted to talk about fairness." He let out a soft, bitter laugh. "Then let's start by telling the truth." Another silence, but this one was different. It wasn't discomfort anymore. It was impact. Madeline's expression had changed. It wasn't just the audience watching Darius now. It was the entire country. And then the moment, Darius turned slightly, looking straight into the camera. "I know what some of you are thinking right now," he said. "Some of you are nodding because you've seen this, lived this." He held his gaze. "And some of you are sitting there frowning, arms crossed, telling yourself this isn't real, that I'm just playing victim, that it's all in my head." His lips pressed together for a second before he finished, "But deep down, you know I'm right." The studio was silent. No one breathed. Then, "All right, we need to take a quick break." The producer's voice crackled over the speakers. Madeline forced a polite smile. "We'll be back with more after this." The cameras cut, but the damage was done. Within an hour, clips of the exchange were everywhere. But the real storm was just beginning. The clip hit social media like a wrecking ball. By the time Darius was in his car, his phone was exploding. Texts, missed calls, notifications flooding his screen. Twitter was on fire. Darius Bell just exposed the media's bias on live TV. This was powerful. Truth hurts. The way he looked into the camera and called out America. Chills. Darius Bell was right, but not everyone saw it that way. Here we go again. Another successful guy pretending to be oppressed. Cry me a river. Stop the victim mindset. Wow, this guy just proved why people don't like hiring activists. Play the race card all you want, but hard work speaks louder. Cable news picked it up within an hour. Some called him brave, others called him angry and aggressive. By lunchtime, the Morning Exchange released a careful statement. "We value open dialogue and diverse perspectives." While today's discussion became more intense than expected, "We stand by our commitment to fair conversations." Darius laughed when he read it. "Fair, right?" His assistant Tasha called him, her voice half laughing, half worried. "Do you realize you just set the internet on fire?" Darius rubbed his forehead. "Wasn't exactly my plan." "Well, congrats. You just became the most talked about entrepreneur in America." He didn't respond. He knew what came next. Because viral moments don't stay just moments. They become battlegrounds. And the next 48 hours were about to get messy. But this wasn't just about him anymore. By the next morning, the story had exploded beyond social media. Cable news hosts debated it on live TV. Opinion pieces flooded every major news site. Everyone had an angle. Fox News, "Is Darius Bell the new face of corporate entitlement?" CNN, "Darius Bell's viral moment, a reckoning for America's meritocracy." Business Insider, "What Darius Bell's interview reveals about race and success in America." Meanwhile, Madeline Royce was trying to control the damage. On her show the next morning, she gave a carefully practiced response. "I respect Mr. Bell and his accomplishments, but I stand by my questions. My job as a journalist is to ask what the audience is thinking. If my questions were uncomfortable, that only proves how necessary they were." Translation, she wasn't backing down. Darius watched from his office, shaking his head. Tasha sat across from him, scrolling through emails. "You know," she said, "we just got lots of new investors wanting to work with us." Darius smirked. "Let me guess. The same people who ignored us last year. Tasha shrugged. Guess being controversial is good for business, but it wasn't all positive. Some clients pulled out. A big corporate partner suddenly decided to reevaluate their commitments. And then came the death threats, emails, phone calls, even an unmarked package left outside Innovis headquarters. Nothing inside but a piece of paper with one word written in bold. Enough. Tasha frowned as she read the message. You need security. Darius let out a slow breath, rubbing his temples. He knew this would happen. Anytime a black man speaks too boldly, too honestly, this is what happens. But backing down was never an option. And now he had to decide. Would he let the threats silence him? Or was this just the beginning of something bigger? Darius sat in his office, looking at the city through the big windows. The last 3 days had been crazy. Praise, attacks, threats, opportunities. He thought about his younger self, the kid from Birmingham, who had to fight for every bit of success, who watched doors close in his face while others walked through without even knocking. And now here he was, at the center of a national debate he never asked for, but one he couldn't ignore. Tasha came in, her face unreadable. We just got an offer. Darius raised an eyebrow. From who? She put a folder on his desk. A network. They want you to do a TV special, a one-on-one deep dive about race, business, and the system. Darius let out a breath. So now they want to listen. Tasha smirked. Seems like it. Then, after a pause, what do you want to do? He leaned back in his chair, thinking. He could walk away, let the noise die down, get back to business. Or he could use this moment, not for attention, not for fame, but to say the things nobody wanted to hear. Darius picked up the folder, looked through the offer, then set it down. He looked at Tasha. Tell them I'll do it. Her eyes widened slightly. You sure? He nodded. Yeah, but on my terms. Because if the system was going to put him in the spotlight, he was going to control the story. Darius Bell's viral moment wasn't just another internet fight. It was a wake-up call. It forced people to talk about things they'd been avoiding for decades. About race, about success, about who gets to rise without questions and who gets questioned when they rise. Some called him an activist, some called him arrogant, some called him right. But one thing was certain, nobody could ignore him anymore. So what do you think? Does success mean playing by the rules of a broken system? Or does it mean rewriting the rules entirely? Let us know in the comments. And if you believe more stories like this need to be told, subscribe.